You know what I got the other day, Pete? Stephen King's latest. Want to borrow it?
Do you know who you're talking to?
What do you mean?
Andy, when's the last time I read a paper book? It's been decades. I would much rather use Kindle, or better yet, Audible.
What am I thinking? I don't read paper books anymore either. I'm an audiobook guy all the way. For those looking to listen to the books behind the films that we've talked about here on Movies We Like, not to mention all the other podcasts in the Next Reel family, get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at thenextreel.com/audible.
There are so many great adaptations from Movies We Like available in audio form.
Early on, we covered Casino Royale with director Matthew Gratzner. You went through all of the 007 books on Audible, right?
I did indeed. What a series. We also covered Room with legendary Dee Wallace and Never Let Me Go with costume designer Alana Moorehead.
We chatted about Fat City with cinematographer Sam Levy and Silver Linings Playbook with the great composer Harry Gregson Williams.
101 Dalmatians and Bambi.
Apocalypse Now, There Will Be Blood, The Thin Red Line.
There's so many great adaptations with so many great guests, and you can get all these as audiobooks on Audible, along with thousands of other great reads.
Producing this podcast is a lot of fun, but it does take a lot of time. We have already dropped the dynamically inserted ads because they are so annoying and have no connection to our content.
Plus, they just jam those things in wherever they see fit.
We listened when you said you didn't like them. So now, we're directly appealing to you, our dear listener. Please consider an Audible subscription to help support Movies We Like and the Next Reel's family of podcasts.
I've been using Audible along with my family for decades now. I love it, and I've read hundreds of books through it. Couldn't be more pleased with their service, and I know you'll love it too. Head to thenextreel.com/audible and get your free trial. It really helps us out. And you have a world of over 200,000 audiobooks open to you.
So much great material available. Dive in with a free trial and get your first free audiobook at thenextreel.com/audible.
Start listening to amazing audiobooks of your favorite movie source material with your first free audiobook today. That's thenextreel.com/audible. Andy, I know you've never been happier than when you're sitting by a warm fire, snuggled up in a flannel and basking in the glow of an old-school budget spreadsheet.
It is a special day I can shut down the world for a little me time.
In a world full of applications, why do these antiquated documents and spreadsheets still run the world? And why haven't they been updated in over 50 years? That's why we want to talk about Coda.
Coda is a new kind of doc that brings words, data, and teams together. It comes with a set of building blocks that anyone can combine to create a doc as powerful as an app.
Coda runs our entire business here at True Story FM, from show scheduling across dozens of podcasts and scripts for thousands of episodes, to budgets and plans and wikis and more.
Coda lets us see our business in a new light. If you'd like to shine a light on productivity in your business and save money along the way, check out Coda today at thenextreel.com/Coda. Hello, and welcome to the Next Reel Speakeasy from rashpixel.fm. I'm Andy Nelson, and that over there is Pete Wright.
Speakeasy number 2!
The Next Reel Speakeasy is a new show we'll be bringing to you each month, in which we invite industry guests to join us, and instead of serving up their favorite cocktails, they serve up movies that they love so that we can all talk about them. We'd like to welcome our guest to this month's show, visual effects supervisor, designer, and director Matthew Gratzner. Matt started in the art department back in 1995 with 4 Rooms, then jumped over to miniatures and effects with Broken Arrow and The Arrival, creating his company, Hunter Gratzner Industries, Inc., which has since become the now Academy Award-winning effects company, New Deal Studios. Working in miniatures and visual effects on many big projects, including From the Earth to the Moon, Armageddon, The Aviator, Iron Man, Real Steel, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, and many, many more. Matt then decided to throw his hat into the directing ring, helming the indie western Hot Bath and a Stiff Drink, along with its sequel. Recently, he's jumped into the new world of virtual reality filmmaking, helping to pioneer the world of storytelling in this new and very exciting format. Say hello to the folks, Matt.
Thank you. Hello to the folks. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Pete. And thanks for inviting me to your show. This is exciting. I'm excited to be involved in number 2 episode.
Auspicious beginnings.
That's right.
That's exciting, and I'll do such a crappy job, it'll be the last episode.
Don't you dare! Don't you dare say that.
I'm kidding. No, I'm very excited. This is cool.
All right. Well, now you brought a movie to the Speakeasy that you love, and that you want to recommend to all of our listeners. And I also think it's safe to say that Pete and I kind of love this one too. So, Matt, what is tonight's movie?
Casino Royale. I'm very excited to talk about that film.
Your file shows no kills. But to become a 00, it takes 2. How did you die? Your contact? Not well. You needn't worry. The second is... yes. Considerably.
And this, of course, is not the 1967-ish spoof version of Casino Royale.
That's what I was going to talk about. Wait a minute. Peter Sellers, Woody Allen. No, it's not. Nice. I screwed you guys. No, it is actually the reboot of the James Bond franchise with Daniel Craig, and it was, and yes, that is the one we'll be talking about. Not the other. The other one's fun, but I'm not talking about that one.
Now, you as an effects guy. Is it hard to go to movies like that are effects and stunt filled?
That's actually a good question. Yes and no. For the James Bond franchise, they could be like naked on screen throwing toilet paper at each other, and I'll watch it because I like James Bond. So it really doesn't matter.
I hear that one's coming up down the line here.
Maybe that. Well, after I might comment on the last one, but no, it is on a film like the Bond franchise or films that are trying to do more. Effects that are seamless. I don't really have a problem if I'm really caught up in the story. And frankly, if I'm starting to notice the effects, it is because maybe the story or the dialogue isn't good, or I'm not really engaged in the characters. Sometimes it's hard, and not because an effect may be poorly achieved. It's when an effect is really, really good, I may stop and go, hey, how did they do that? That looks pretty good. But I actually like if the films are engaging, I'll put that to the side. And even if the effects are not good, or maybe they're showing their hand too much on how they did something because it may not be as seamless as it should be, I'll actually, if the story's good and I'm really into the film and I'm into the characters, then I just ignore it and I keep watching it. But sometimes, if a film is really good and it's seamless, like you just don't care, and that's what it should be for anybody.
Well, and that gets us into, I think, the first question. Talking about sort of this process and what this show is all about, thinking about why the movie that you brought to this platform is important to you. And so I've just been thinking about it all day. Like, what is it about this film that you really connect with to the point that you feel that it's a good one to talk about here?
Honestly, as I said earlier, I'm a huge Bond fanatic, and I've always loved those films, and anything that even is like those films, I always sort of harken back to Bond. And I've always been a fan of the different films, and when they had the Pierce Brosnan films, and they did GoldenEye, I was pretty excited. It's a reboot, new Bond. But, there's a point where the films always sort of take this odd path, and they do. Every different Bond character, Bond actor has gone through the same process where it's a serious film with a little bit of maybe tongue-in-cheek, and then you're introducing the character. And then by the end of that actor's run, it almost becomes campy or almost self-referential or parody. And it always frustrates me because it's like you can keep telling us a solid story. You can have the tongue-in-cheek moments, but don't make it so that it's almost a comic book. And I mean, as I said, I like most of the Pierce Brosnan films, but there's a point towards the end where it was getting, especially if they'd have bizarre composites, and it really took you out of the film. So all of a sudden, he's in a parachute going down a wave, and I was like, I'm not buying any of this. But again, I appreciate the performances, and I think they're terrific actors. But what about the Casino Royale film? What was exciting about it is I felt it was a really successful reboot without it becoming a comic book, still maintaining the different tropes of the Bond franchise, but also sort of reintroducing this new Bond. They weren't when Daniel Craig was first cast, even though I thought he was terrific in Road to Perdition and a number of other pictures he was in. I always felt when I first saw that he was cast, I was like, wow, he kind of is like 009 that would get killed in the prologue. You didn't look like Bond. He doesn't have, he's like, oh, that's the guy who gets shot, and then Bond rolls him over. It's like, okay, but sort of in other films, but then they rebranded the character as this kind of more brutal thug-like character, and you see the arc of who he becomes from the beginning all the way to the end. I mean, I won't jump to the end of the film, but it's a great origin story where you see how he becomes refined, how without it being camp and without trying to, constantly winking at the audience. And both the I think that the writing is excellent, the acting is terrific, but the action really supports the story. And I never felt in the picture the action was for action's sake. And I think this goes without saying about any film. Action and visual effects should never be the forefront of, oh, look, here's this cool effect shot, or here's this really terrific stunt. It always should be, this is in support of the story. Now, it seems obvious, but I felt that every gag in Casino Royale, and I hand this, and maybe I don't know the director. I've worked very at a distance with Martin Campbell. We had helped him on a couple pictures, but very much at a distance. But if you look at Mask of Zorro and even GoldenEye, there's definitely, he has a style in telling stories visually, and I think that his action beats and how he interweaves action and character is exceptional. And he really does have sort of a thumbprint if you watch his films. And I think Casino Royale is no exception, because that opening scene is the whole movie really, to me, encompasses like the reboot of the Bond franchise and how it works. And I thought it was an exceptional combination of photography, visual effects, production, but of course, script and story, all of it combined. It's I don't want to say it's like a perfect movie. I mean, every movie has its, flaws and moments, but there's never a point where you're watching it, or for me at least, where I'm like, I don't buy that. It's like, no, it's. I think it's really well done. That's why I just like the film. I think it's very well done.
Well, and then to your point, I was nervous about Daniel Craig too, but I'm nervous about every Bond transition. I'm just kind of panicky like that. And this movie, I think, took exactly a minute 30 seconds to convince me that I had no reason to fear.
Right.
And I think it's the same thing. I didn't really understand it at the time, or I didn't think about it in this light until I saw The Force Awakens. When you see what Abrams was trying to do with the Star Wars franchise, I think they were doing with the Bond franchise, which is a certain degree of reclamation of the property, which, we're going to take ownership in a new direction and try to do something different because it's gotten to this other place that we're collectively not all that happy with.
Sure.
The thing that worried me the most, I think, is that they brought back, even Martin Campbell, and I actually, I know Andy's going to raise a fit about this. I actually really liked GoldenEye.
It's not that I don't like GoldenEye.
No, you have your words.
You say it's the next best.
Extreme, but I actually really quite liked GoldenEye, and I wasn't a huge fan of many of the Pierce Brosnans, certainly not as much as some earlier ones, but I was nervous that we have Martin Campbell, we had Neal Purvis, Robert Wade. I mean, we have these guys coming back who, granted, but are those the right guys to really reboot? Right. I think so much of this so much of the success of this movie rides on the shoulders of Daniel Craig and his ability to create a thuggish Bond that goes back to the roots, a Bond that is emotional, a Bond that is funny, a Bond that is more physical than any of the Bonds prior. It was, I think, all of those things, in that incredible fight. In the opening sequence, the pre-credits roll.
I'd love to talk about that, but keep going. Yes.
No. I mean, that's really it. That's that incredible fight. It introduces us to this character in a way that was about as efficient a storytelling tool as I can remember in an action film to get us to know this character.
Absolutely.
And I think so much of that, and I mean, I think that all of those people, there's a lot of credit to be given to the people that have been mentioned as far as creating this Bond, but also we have to give credit where credit is due to Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson and the rest of the Bond team that somehow manages to keep this franchise running, and even when it starts kind of tipping in the wrong direction, they manage to grab the reins and pull it into the right direction. And I'm always impressed with what they do here. And I think that there was a huge thing, like managing to, I think that several things happened with Die Another Day right before this one, where it was really tipping into kind of stuff that was a little too fantastical,
right,
a little too silly. And I think that they were really smart in saying, what can we do to kind of take our next step here? And they had always felt that if they could get the rights back to Casino Royale, that they could do something with it, but that the rights for that had been tied up for so long, and it wasn't until around 2000 when they finally got the rights back and were able to figure it out. And then weirdly, I learned this, which I didn't know, that they had, while they were trying to sort that out, they had Purvis and Wade, the screenwriters, start developing a spin-off movie of Hinks, of Halle Berry's character, that was going to be a very serious tone, and it was going to be really kind of the same tone that we ended up getting in Casino Royale. And it was the tone that they liked so much when they were developing that script. And that's what really drew people in. And finally, and the book, my understanding, I mean, Pete, you read some of the book. I've never read the actual book Casino Royale, but I hear that it actually is really gritty, and it has the same tone to it. Oh, you've read it too?
No, but I was talking to a friend of mine who has, and we were actually talking about the film a few weeks ago, ironically, before I said I was going to talk about it on the show. And we were talking, I said, and then you talk about the scene where he's playing the testicular piñata where the guy's tied to the chair. That's in the book.
Yeah.
Like, that was in the book. And I thought, you're kidding me. Ian Fleming wrote that in the book. And you're like, yeah, when he's in the chair and being tortured by Lashif, that's in the book. And I thought, wow, yeah, it's pretty gritty. But that to me was encompassed how well, how good the storytelling and how confident, I should say, they were in taking the risks, because here's a scene that could either be laughed at if it was done wrong, or was just really brutal without actually, because it's all implied. It's not like you're having to show some close-up of him getting beaten up or cut, or because not to go off on tangents, but like in Spectre, if you've seen Spectre, there's a scene he's in this sort of torture chair, and there's a Dremel like drill thing drilling into his skull or his neck or whatever. And I'm like, I don't need that. You can imply it, but don't go to the point where you're watching like Saw. I don't need it.
Yeah. Well, and what's so beautiful about that is Lashif actually explains. Right. Why that is so stupid in this movie. In his speech, it really is just the most simple things.
Right.
We just need simple things.
So great.
Yeah.
But the brutality of the film, I think that one of the advantages of this film, or what I love so much, is, you'd referenced Force Awakens, and I'm certainly not going to go down and talk about that film. We're not talking about that film. However, what I thought worked well with this film was they did reference their own mythology, but without it seeming like they were winking at the audience. When Bond because the movie, as I said, it's an entire arc to how James Bond becomes James Bond. And so when he is just the section chief and he kills that guy in the beginning, and he has to have 2 kills, and so you see this just absolutely brutal fight in a bathroom. He beats the heck out of this guy, and then he says, it's 2 kills. He says yes, and then you cut to him when he kills the guy, and when the guy picks up the gun and you turn, he spins just like he does in every Bond film and shoot, and now all of a sudden you're looking down the rifled barrel of the gun and the blood comes down. But it's not like, oh, quick, let's do the old Bond circles across where he's a target. It's like they worked that into the story, and so you knew what that was, but it wasn't such a wink to the audience where it felt like, oh yeah, you're just giving me what I want. I mean, and they did that throughout the entire picture, from the fact that he had an Aston Martin and all the other gags, without it becoming, as I said, cliche or almost campy. And I thought that's one of the things about the film. They just took a lot of risks, because they did do a lot of things, from the fact of casting Daniel Craig, who's sort of against type, to all the things he's doing and the brutality.
It's remarkably easy to read the book and see Daniel Craig now, I think, in terms of casting. It was really beautiful. One of the things that I think is interesting that is in this movie, I think it connects pretty well with his portrayal of this. In the book, I just want to read a quick passage, or a couple of quick passages. Against the background of the luminous and sparkling stage, he's in a casino now. Bond stood in the sunshine, or walking out of a casino, I should say, stood in the sunshine and felt his mission to be incongruous and remote, and his dark profession an affront to all his fellow actors. He shrugged away the momentary feeling of unease and walked round and back to the back of his hotel and down the ramp to the garage. He's on his way to get his car. What's so amazing about this, to me, this is peppered throughout the book. It's that sense of him learning how to be cold,
right?
And that's something that I think Daniel Craig does really well. I mean, I think he really executes that well. The only other thing that I thought was interesting is this passage. Bond's car was his only personal hobby. One of the last of the 4.5-liter Bentleys with the supercharger by Amherst, VA. He had bought it almost new in 1933 and had kept it in careful storage through the war. It goes into so much more of his personal detail, his personal effects, the things that you don't imagine James Bond even having. right?
Sure.
That we get to see much more of his kind of background, and that gets into his relationship with women,
Right.
and of course we get into his relationship with Vesper, and I think if there is a shortcoming for me in this in his relationship with her, it's that it happens practically in a microwave.
Right.
There is this, it's just rollicking, fantastic action film, and then we have the relationship stuff, and it feels just kind of shoehorned in there. Insofar as I adore her character. She is a strong female lead in the film.
Oh, absolutely.
That doesn't have to be strong in the way that she happens to know, kung fu. She is dominant because she's brilliant.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Right, she can hold her own, and I think that is the thing to celebrate with her relationship here. And I sort of wish it were a little bit better articulated throughout the film. I just feel like it's just hammered home in a very kind of almost ham-fisted segment.
Well, that falls to the fact that it's a relatively short story. It's one of these. It's true. It's a movie love story. I mean, they fall in love in an instant, and over the course of, I don't know, a couple of days or whatever, how quickly it is. All of a sudden they're madly in love and running off together.
Except, first of all, I agree with you. I mean, the challenge is you've got this story that has certain beats and certain moments in the pacing you've got to hit, and it's hard. Otherwise, you can't make a 3-hour film. But when they're on the train, and it's actually probably one of the best written sequences in the film, and they're sizing each other up, when she walks away and he smiles, that's where it starts.
Yes.
I mean,
right.
So if you look at the subtleties, I'm not disagreeing that it is very quick, and it is kind of like, okay, quick, we got to get to the part where they fall in love and everything. But if you look at the subtleties of the relationship and how he's playing, and how the two of them are playing off each other, it is actually strung throughout the second they sort of meet, and particularly when they size each other up, because, and again, it's very hard to say, but maybe the character of Bond at this point had never met a woman that piqued his interest intellectually in that point, and who also happened to be attractive, so that kind of played into that. But no, I agree. It's hard. It's hard in a Bond film to work that out. And the challenge is you're trying to show the brutality of this guy and who he is, but then of course he falls for her and then kind of loses perspective, and she dupes him in a way, and she steals the money and all that.
Yeah, I mean, really, it ends up being 20 other Bond films where his prior relationships had been nuanced and teased out, and here they're giving us all that backstory.
Oh, absolutely, and it was good, and even another thing that I thought was really, really well done, very trivial to throw away, but they're in the car and he's talking about that they're married, and he says that her name, and he's just screwing with her name is Stephanie Broadchest, and he's like, give me that, and it was great because that was such a throwback to obviously Pussy Galore and all the Dr. Goodhead from Moonraker, of course, and all these films. So it was great because it was a throwaway, but again, it wasn't like, oh, let's give her the name and everybody will laugh. It's like he's making the joke, and so again, all of that stuff I thought was well done, and she played it off well, and it wasn't like she wasn't some airhead, but at any rate, but I thought it was pretty great.
Yeah, and I do like that. I mean, as a couple, they do end up going through a lot of emotional turmoil together.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's another thing that really, for me, does actually make for a strong relationship. And maybe it's the speed relationship, two people falling in love because they went through an intense experience together, sort of thing. But I end up buying it. I think maybe a little more than you, Pete. But I like the moment when she witnesses his battling the two guys in the stairwell.
Right.
Which I think is a fantastic stunt scene. Just brutal, brutal. And she's, stuck in there as this whole thing happens and ends up helping him at the end. And it puts her into a state of shock. And I love how she plays that. And I love that scene in the shower when he comes and helps
absolutely.
her. That.
Well,
it's so touching and it's beautiful.
And it wasn't, the thing that was so great, it wasn't like this cliche movie moment. It's like, oh, well, she's an accountant, but she can understand when two guys get brutally murdered, and she'll just be what? No, she was shocked. She couldn't deal with it. It was really hard. It was an emotional impact. And then he realized, well, even though he's numb to those situations, because usually he's 50% of what's going on in a fight, he realized the best thing he could do was try to comfort her. And I thought that was actually very believable and realistic, because really 99% of all action films, somebody would witness something like that, and then the next scene they're drinking coffee and like, well, that was great. What else to do? Not even reacting, where she really did react. So they didn't make her. They might have made her larger than life in her intellect and her snappy comments, but they didn't make her a superhero, which I thought was pretty great.
If there's any female character I I had a small issue with it was Le Chiffre's girl who nearly gets her arm cut off, and the bad guys are like, oh, you don't even say a thing, and I almost cut her arm off, and then she goes right back to helping him.
The next sequence, she is as happy as could possibly be.
But the thing there is that it just goes to show that he basically owned her. I mean, he was she's not, and I'm not justifying that, but yeah, I mean, it was
such a minor complaint for me. It's
and I don't want to make this a book review. I really don't. But there is one other passage I wanted, because that scene on the train where they meet is in the book. It's a variation on the scene, but it turns out she was introduced to him by Mathis in the book. Mathis brings Vesper to him, right? She's not a treasury person, but she gets up and has they have their parting ways, and this is what's going on in his head, Bond thinks. And then there was this pest of a girl, he sighed. Women were for recreation. On a job, they got in the way and fogged things up with sex and hurt feelings and all the emotional baggage they carried around. One had to look out for them and take care of them. Bitch, said Bond, and then remembering the Munces, he said bitch again more loudly and walked out of the room.
Wow.
Now, that's the setup of his relationship with women. And in that respect, as I'm reading that and then watching this movie, I'm thinking, wow, they have done such a beautifully wonderful thing in this movie in the way they have modernized Bond's relationship with women.
Right.
Even better than so many of the other Bond movies have in their interpretation.
No, that's true. I mean, that definitely is a great bridge to and that's what also makes him a real guy and isn't just a robot killing machine. Although in the superhero sense, and even though there are things that are almost almost superhuman about the opening sequence you're talking about earlier, the parkour sequence. When I saw that in the theater, because this was sort of, I have my, apprehension. Okay, is this movie going to be good? I hope it's great. And they have the opening, the prologue, and the credit sequence is great. And the song is great. When they had that opening sequence with the parkour, if I've watched that scene probably a couple dozen times, just that scene alone, because shot for shot, there's not a wasted angle or shot or insert in that scene from the start of them running to them going to the embassy. And it's unbelievable. And it's probably some of the best. It's probably one of the best. I would have to say, not that I would be arrested for being wrong, but I would have to say that it's probably one of the best action sequences in film if you watch it shot for shot, because it's a great mix of visual effects, 99% of it's practical and in camera, a lot of composites, obviously, because you don't have Daniel Craig on a 600-foot tall crane, but that sequence, to set the film up with that, it was kind of like they had me. The rest of the movie could have been crap, and I would have been like, "This is great. I don't care." Because that sequence was better than entire Bond films of the past. But
yeah, it was a very smart way to begin a new Bond.
Oh, absolutely. The first 15 minutes of this film is just, it's nonstop. And that's the thing I was, as you're watching that particular sequence, I'm thinking to myself, and you already said it, 99% of the sequence is practical, but, so any of the CG stuff that's done in there is largely related to, removing wires.
It's removing wires, painting out stuff. There's I think, and I could be wrong, because sadly, I know the miniature work in the show, but I don't know all of it. I think there's a sequence, when the pipes drop, or there's in the explosion when the gas tanks drop from that one worker. I think that's a miniature, if I'm not mistaken. It's like a sixth or quarter scale model of the stuff blowing up. But yeah, they're not doing digital bonds. They're not, and I don't even think they did face replacement, because that wasn't at its peak at that time, although it's been around for a bit. I think it was just a lot of really good doubling. And then
I don't think I heard about that until Skyfall. I think that's when I first heard that.
Right, when he was on the motorcycle.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah, no. So in this case, it really was just a lot of very, very intelligently chosen shots that are of Daniel Craig running up things, jumping through, and just really spectacular editing. Stuart Baird, who cut the film, who's actually a director in his own right, is an exceptional editor. And we had the chance a few years back to work with him on some films. And again, it's just really good. Everybody is at the top of their game on this picture. It's not like there's one this wasn't that great. It's like every single department is really doing their best.
Well, absolutely.
While we're talking about the stunt work, I was going to ask you what the real highlight sequence of this film of the film as a whole is for you, but it sounds like you just described it.
The opening sequence by far is. I mean, everything's of course the scene with the fuel truck when they're going to ambush the airplane, or to blow up the airplane is terrific, and I mean all those scenes are really, really well done. The end, of course, is great, but the parkour sequence in the beginning is good, and I think what makes it so damn good is they very intelligently, for life of me, I can't remember the name of the actor, but the guy they put as the bomb maker is a guy who does parkour. So it's not like, we're going to cast, Michael B. Jordan as the terrorist, and then we'll double him with a guy. It's like, no, they just got the guy who could do this. Stunt actors are often cast, but it was cast so well because you're never at a point where you don't believe it. So because this guy is doing all his own stunts, when Daniel Craig is doubled, you don't think about it because you already see the other guy. It's a great misdirection. So you're always showing the one guy doing all this stuff, and you're like, well, of course Daniel Craig's doing it because this guy's doing it. So because it's a good sleight of hand. And what also works so well about that specific opening is you not only have all the violence of it all, which again there's nothing great about that, but it's tempered with these sort of bizarre human error moments. Like there's a scene where the terrorist or the bomb maker, does this kind of leap up through, it's it's a vent shaft that's open in a wall, and he kind of lifts himself and just seamlessly, just without touching the wall, feet first sails through it, and Bond follows by busting through the drywall. He just runs through the wall, and it got a laugh. I remember in the theater, everybody laughed, and I thought that was a really great moment. And then, of course, go to all the way to the end. So you see all this mayhem and all this craziness. He goes in the embassy. He's shooting at people. He shoots the gas tanks, explodes, blah, blah, blah. He finally gets what he's looking for, information. And there's a bomb in the backpack. Like, after all of this, the button on the sequence is he pulls out a bomb, and you're like, and then he gently puts it down. Like, it's going to make a big difference.
Now it needs to be handled easily.
But I thought that was a great gag because it wasn't done for slapstick or just cheesy comedy. It was done because, he's established he's a bomb maker, so maybe he would have had that. But then you go through, so of course you think back to the whole sequence, the fact that it didn't go off. But I thought those kinds of moments, or those moments, are very true to the sort of Bond, mythology, where again you're not doing it as a gag, you're not winking to the audience, you're with Bond going, yeah, that would have been bad, and he pulls it out. So
I want to talk about Dame Judy Dench.
Sure.
This is the film. I think the first film that I get a sense for her as a character, really fulfilling her this sort of not the boss role but the mother role.
Right. Well, of course.
And I think that has been something that past Bond movies have aspired to. The other 6 movies had sort of aspired to. I should say 3 or 4 before this one. But I don't think they really fulfilled. I think their chemistry on screen, particularly the sequence where they go to see the dead woman in the hammock,
right.
Where they have that conversation, and the conversation about you be honest with me. You knew I wasn't going to let this go. She said, well, you got to, I think you be you, essentially.
Right.
Is that relationship that I have always wanted between James Bond and M.
Oh, absolutely. And, well, what's terrific is that she's who promoted him. So she has a sense of responsibility, and the fact that he breaks into her house and the absolute regret of, well, what was I thinking? I shouldn't have promoted. It was too soon. This was a mistake. But she does believe in him, and she does know. So there's a certain maternal relationship in that respect, because she does care, and she doesn't. She says, you've got to be more than a blunt instrument, because she believes that he will do the job he needs to do. And then the arc being at the end when she's like, well, now you can't be distracted. Now you've learned your lesson. Like, in other words, I've taken you through this process. So no, I thought that the relationship there was exceptional, and I thought it was great that it was sort of, I felt the strongest portrayal of M from Judy Dench in all the films.
Well, what's also great about her in this film is that she's, aside from teaching him that lesson about not being emotional and getting attached to things, there's a huge story element about the bigger picture here that she's also kind of teaching him, and it seems to be almost an equal struggle that he doesn't see things for the big picture.
Right.
He kills the bomb maker.
Right.
And he doesn't see that they wanted to catch him so that they could get information from him.
Right.
And it takes him a while, and it's not until the end when he finds out why didn't they kill him and all that, and it's all because he is just he's a pawn in this whole thing, and Le Chiffre is kind of a pawn as well, but he's got information, and that's why they would welcome him with open arms, and that's why Mr. White comes in and kills him. Like, there's so much more going on, which I think is so fascinating for a Bond film, because usually you have this big bad that he's fighting, and in this one you don't. You've got this extra layer of bigger stuff that's happening. And I think that Judi Dench is a great person to kind of be the shepherd for that element as well, kind of saying, look, there's more going on here. And as a parent, I mean, I think that there is that great relationship here, not just about the emotional side of things, but also about, it's almost like the wisdom of being a spy that she's also helping him with.
Absolutely. And the whole concept that, in most of the Bond films, Bond's the smartest guy in the room. And here Bond is almost you're seeing the film through his eyes, as opposed to watching him make decisions and try to figure out what he's doing. You're figuring it out along with him. Yeah. So it's an interesting device for the narrative, which I mean, I don't want to sit and think of every Bond film, but I don't think that's ever really been done before, because Bond is usually the one who knows everything. He's still, listen, the Bond character in Casino Royale is still very smart. He's figuring out how to track things down, how to do things. He's the best card player they have. Although when he loses, he grabs a knife. He's like, screw it, I'm going to kill this guy.
Yeah, and another sort of blunt force instrument.
Yeah. He's like, okay, I've exhausted everything I can do intellectually. I'm going to just stick the thing in his neck, and that'll be that. And then he bumps into Felix Leiter and says, I'll give you some money. So I thought that was actually a great, and that was a complete surprise in the film. Like, when I first saw it the first time, did not expect that. Like, I thought, okay, well, this is going to, because they've established when he kills the sort of, I guess he's Russian, the terrorist, who I can't recall the character's name now, but the one he kills in the Body Worlds exhibit in Miami. Demetrius, yeah. And so he stabs it. You're thinking, okay, well, obviously you've established that he can do that if he has to. So you expect that was going to happen yet again, or it was going to be a big knockdown shootout. But no, it was good.
Where does Mads Mikkelsen stack up? I mean, you introduced him, Andy. I think I think he's a great character to talk about. He's certainly an interesting character, but you're right, he's not a big bad. Where does he stack up as a representation of evil in Bond's world? And I would add as a caveat, and we don't need to talk about what we liked or not liked about Spectre, but having seen Spectre, did that change your opinion on this viewing of Casino Royale?
Well, yeah, I don't want to talk about Spectre because I have certain pros and cons about that film. But in regards to Mads Mikkelsen, I think his character of Le Chiffre, while he is not the mastermind behind everything, I completely believe that he's just a really bad, evil person. And he doesn't have to be, even, of course, smacking a guy with a rope in the lower region doesn't hurt. But in regards to how he stacks up I actually think he's a terrific villain in the film, because he's never a parody. And that's always a challenge with Bond villains, because as soon as you're bald, have an eye patch or a scar running through your eye, and you're petting a cat, you're screwed.
Especially, I mean, he even bleeds out of his eye.
But that was such a great, that and the fact that he was asthmatic and he's got the inhaler, but the bleeding out of the eye was so good, because for Mads Mikkelsen, I think, is actually quite a terrific actor. And you buy, he's so understated in the film. It's never like hand-wringing, like I'm going to open the floor and you're going to fall into the shark tank. It's always like, even when he had the people on the boat at the beginning of the film and he says, show my guests out, in 5 minutes, show my guests out or throw them overboard. Like, I don't really care what you do. Just get these people out of here. And the biggest thing about his character and how he plays him is there's never bravado. It's just very straightforward, because obviously he's supposed to be extremely good with numbers. He's like an accountant in some respect. So he's not somebody who's going to sit there and tell his master plan. He's not going to do a whole, monologue about how he's going to do this or that. And I think that he works as a villain, even though he's not the mastermind behind all of it. Obviously, Mr. White is that connection. He still is just a really bad guy, to the point where he's losing at cards and he's like, I'm just going to poison this guy. That's what I'm going to do. I mean, he's right. Bad, but he's not like diabolically bad. He's kind of like a thug.
But you know what's so really great about it that we never would have seen? I don't think we ever saw in a previous Bond film. We never saw the guy set up as the big bad being threatened. And here he was threatened twice in a significant way. Right. And we got to see Mads Mikkelsen demonstrate what it means to be a guy who is in terror for his own life and
Right.
also be the bad guy. Like when he goes back to that card table, he goes back
Right.
to that card table with an air of desperation that we
Right.
don't get from other Bond bad guys, I don't think.
Exactly. Well, because we set it up because he failed on there's a whole terror attack on the airplane, and he failed on that, and then was like he lost this guy's $100 million, so he's screwed. Which, by the way, that shot of the plane is like is 100% that when you're in the hangar. I mean, I just throw this in there. When you crane down into the hangar where you see this massive, I guess it's supposed to be the predecessor of what's now the A380. That's 100% in camera model shot with just composites of people walking around. It's fantastic.
Wow.
It's like a big scale model hangar, model lighting. There's nothing in it except they comped people walking around. I mean, I'm a fan of those sort of in camera techniques that you never call it out as an effect shot. It looks like holy. There's a giant. I shouldn't say that language. Cut that out. You'll say, "Holy." Well, yeah, it's a family show.
PG, we get one, right?
Okay, well, that was it. But you see it, and you're like, "Wow, that's like they must have mocked up some giant airplane," because it doesn't look like an effect. There's a complete tangent.
No, it's brilliant. Yeah, it's brilliant.
So, did you know, or did you find out through your channel?
No, actually, I knew only because the visual effects supervisor for the show is a guy by the name of Steve Begg, who's extremely talented and. Steve Begg he was a protege of Derek Meddings. And of course, Derek Meddings worked on all the, Thunderbirds. I mean, he was the sort of the other half of Jerry Anderson's legacy because he did all the miniature effects, Thunderbirds, Space 1999, UFO, all those things. And, so I knew because Steve Begg was the visual effects supervisor and also sort of the miniature supervisor, I knew that there were going to be model shots. And the only thing that called that out as a model shot to me was the composite of the people walking. There's like a weird perspective shift. It's really subtle, and it actually is pretty darn good. But when I was looking at it, I'm like, okay, this has got to be an in-camera model shot. Because first of all, I know they would never have built for 2 shots or 3 shots in the film a full-scale mock-up. I knew it wasn't digital because the lighting was too darn good. And to me, it felt like a model shot, not because it looked bad, but because it just was so real. And lo and behold, that's how they did the shot. And but it was the people walking where it was something that felt like a composite to me. And as I said, it wasn't poorly done. It just, I mean, to answer your question earlier, can you tell when you watch a show, or that's a moment where I'm like, okay, this is how they had to done it, have achieved the shot. Because at the end, when the Venice house sinks, I had worked on a picture called The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and we were supposed to do and had built a humongous set for Venice, Italy, and we shot the heck out of it. And there was a scene where all the buildings were supposed to sink, very much like that. And then the director changed his mind like at the last minute. So we ended up doing some other stuff that was not probably as convincing. But when that building started to sink, I'm like, okay, this is not a real building, for one, because there's no way they would have rigged this full scale. Not because it doesn't look real, but just because the practicality and the budget of what it would take to do that.
Yeah, right.
And I knew it wasn't digital because at that time, the digital work, I always could tell. So it ended up being, of course, a 3rd scale model between a couple miniature buildings, then composited into a plate of Venice. But yeah, I mean, that to me, honestly, the best visual effects are always sleight of hand. Some miniature work, some digital work, although the digital work now is getting really, really good. But I can always tell. I can't think of a film where I saw something. I was like, oh, I don't know how they did that. You just know. And the biggest way to call out a visual effect shot that's done digitally is look at when they're getting better at this, but look at how it's quote unquote virtually photographed. A lot of times people will shoot something or quote set up a digital camera in a manner or move the camera in a manner you could never do for real. And if you do that, that's the biggest giveaway. One of the things you could tell when shots are done is where the camera starts swimming around or you're going through things. Audiences pick it up, not because they're like, oh, that doesn't look real because it's digital. It's because in their brain, they're like, I don't know how. It takes you out of the film, because if you watch a film that isn't photographed like that, and then you have a scene where all of a sudden you're doing something with a camera that's basically impossible, that's what really calls a lot of those shots out. And the fact that in Destruction, and they're doing a lot of digital destruction now. There used to be a point where we would do a ton of, obviously, miniature effects and then even photographic elements. And now they're doing a lot of it digitally. And some of it's really good, but some of it still doesn't have the correct gravity or inertia that you would expect if it were real. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Well, and it really does all boil down to the storytelling, I think. Because
Absolutely.
Same thing with like stop motion animation. Stop motion has never looked real to me, but
Right.
It's fun to watch. And in the right story, it just doesn't even matter.
Doesn't matter.
And I think that's how any effects really work. As long as I'm really invested in the story, and this goes back to exactly what you said at the beginning, it doesn't matter because you can just move right along with it, and you're focused on the story. You're not focused on those elements.
Correct. And you just have to, there's, well, like this could be 7 different Speakeasy shows, but the challenges with visual effects and how to incorporate them into a film, and the challenges of how a film gets greenlit, and the challenges of how a film is racing to the deadline of a release date. I mean, there's so many things that go into how a film gets made, and frankly, how diabolically difficult it is to get a film made and make it good. Starting with a good script at least gives you a good chance you'll have a good movie. But there's so much that goes into it. And what tends to happen now, and this is the last thing I'll say about effects, because I don't want to monopolize a conversation about visual effects. But the biggest challenge that effects has is most people, pretty much everybody I talk to, I do a lot of lectures and I'll talk in schools and public forums and that sort of thing. And the audience knows that stuff is starting to look very cartoony. The fully animated films, I don't mean a fully animated, Pixar stuff is terrific, but the fully animated visual effects that are in live action pictures, people can pick out. And they talk about, oh, well, stuff doesn't look like it did in Blade Runner or the first Jurassic Park or what have you, because it was a mix of all these techniques. But the studios won't do those techniques anymore because practical effects mixed with digital, I think, is a terrific solution. But practical effects in general requires 2 things. A director with conviction that can design and understand what he's doing in the show or she's doing in the show, and the fact that a studio can't control it till the release date. See, digital effects you can constantly tweak. You can go, let's do this. Now let's re-render it. Let's put the camera somewhere else. In a practical effect, once you commit to it, you're kind of stuck with it for good or for bad. And that's the thing is that studios now, because it's such a corporately driven entity and enterprise, which I understand, they have to make sure that that film is being controlled to the last minute. And what digital work does is it allows a studio, if need be, to take the artistic basically power out of a director's hands, and they can go and keep working on the film. So that's one of the reasons why you don't see as many practical effects, because audiences do know the difference, but until audiences stop en masse going to the movies because the effects they don't like, the studio is going to still deliver what they can deliver because the movies still make money.
Yeah, I had no idea about that. That's a major lesson learned for me. I had no idea that was one of the contingent forces.
Well, it's because you can always, imagine like having to constantly put your hand on it. And then, as I said, some directors also Chris Nolan is a prime example of someone who has conviction, who has a very strong vision, and, fortunately for everybody who works with him, has sort of the power to say, this is how I'm going to do it. And, every film that we've worked with him on, it is literally like, this is how the scene's going to be done, and I really want to apply these things. And, he consults and says, what do you think? But it's not like we're in the middle of shooting something and says, I'm going to change my mind. I mean, the shots for Interstellar, what we shot was what he wanted. And it wasn't like, well, I don't know. I mean, he knew from the beginning, to the point then where the miniature was working so well helping the story, he started saying, well, you know what? I have some other moments I'd love to just capture. Let's just shoot some. Because he was starting to cut. He was cutting in the photography of what we were shooting, motion control of the miniatures, into his edit in the process. Because unlike digital work where you're constantly having to render the work, once you photograph something and then cut in the footage, regardless of the background being composited or not, you have now a sequence that can tell a story. Mm-hmm. So a guy like Chris Nolan, he has the conviction to know what he wants by the end.
I think to that end, I think that it does show that, Martin Campbell, I think, did have some of that conviction here.
Oh, absolutely.
Willing to really focus on doing as much practically as they possibly could and doing the stunts as realistically as they possibly could. And to that, kudos to him and the team, because I really think that they made a film that it really does feel like all of this stuff is really happening. And because of that, it just really intensifies everything in it.
Oh, absolutely. And he is a director. Like I said, you can see any one of his films and they all have a specific tone and style, not just within the performance of the actors, but even the pacing, the editing. And, that is a mark of a good director, is someone that, maybe you don't like the subject matter necessarily, or maybe you don't like some of the plot points, but the style in which the film is told and the way the story is told within that visual narrative, his consistency in how he tells a story is spot on every time. It's very good.
Andy wanted to talk a lot about Green Lantern, though.
Well, we don't talk about that. No. Like, I mean, that's funny. That's a hard film to make, and I'm certainly funny enough, we worked on some of it, doing just some set pieces and some other stuff. Nothing too heavy in visual effects or any of that. Mm-hmm. Green Lantern is a hard superhero to tell that story. That's the challenge. Is you have I'm certainly don't want to talk about Green Lantern, but it's just the mythology of that character is kind of challenging. And like, how do you tell that story unless you're a fan of the comic book? How do you tell that to a new audience and then they're going to understand it? Because there's sort of fantastical things that happen in the comic book that work great in a comic book from 30, 40 years ago, but it's very, very difficult to be true to that vision and that mythology in a modern story. So it is,
to that point, and I'll go ahead and try to bring this back to Bond even. I think one of that at the time Green Lantern came out, it was only like 4 years ago, right? I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, right? But even then, I don't think the industry knew sufficiently how to tell comic book stories. We had them. We didn't really know kind of what was going to connect. What were the elements that were going to connect with mass audiences? And so I think they could. I think they could come back and tell a Green Lantern story now, after Joss Whedon's Avengers. I think we're getting after Guardians of the Galaxy that you can tell some pretty obscure comic book stories. I just think they weren't quite ready, and I'll say that as an industry. When you look at what comes before Bond, sort of the collected learnings of the Bond industry, I think there was a lot more to work with at the time.
That's true. I mean, it's also, it's challenging because one of the things that Marvel has is they have a certain autonomy because they did so well with Iron Man, and Iron Man was, obviously their first foray into this. That they had the ability to really have this autonomy of how they're going to make the films. And, Green Lantern is Warner Brothers, which is a big studio. And you have a lot of... And I can't speak to why the film worked and didn't work or where it did. I mean, it's just... I've been on enough films of that scale where... it's just a different world. And that's the thing, it isn't the Hollywood of the 1930s or 40s where you had filmmakers that were also, or studio heads that were filmmakers. Now studios are publicly traded companies, and you have executives that have to make sure the shareholders are happy and they have a certain level of profitability. And it's a different machine. And that's why it's always hard when people start talking about how, in the good old days, well, it really wasn't a good old days. Because there's the old time filmmakers. Right. I mean, even though the studio system was flawed, it actually worked quite well in the sense that the heads of the studios basically owned the films. Well, they also owned the actors, which was kind of disturbing because it was almost like slave labor to a degree, although frankly, a lot of them got paid well. But they really had the control. Directors in the golden age of Hollywood, once a lot of directors didn't even go on to the editing process. Like the film went back to the studio, and then they would do what was called retakes, where they would reshoot scenes that if they didn't work. And a lot of times that wasn't even the same director. So, because the studios were the one putting up the money and dealing with the distribution. And so in some ways it hasn't changed. I think that what's changed is that the people who are running the studios now are not necessarily, and some are very good at this, but some are just not filmmakers and they're more business people. And, but it's, I'll say this, and we'll go back to Bond, but filmmaking is a subjective art, and it is one of the most ridiculously impossible things to put in a business format, because you can have a movie that has a terrific script, great actors, great director, and it just isn't clicking with an audience because of the general social awareness of what an audience is thinking at that very moment. I've seen films that came out that I would have never thought would do well, and they did extraordinarily well. I saw films that were really great, and they didn't do well because it's just the timing was bad. You can never put your money on anything unless it has Han Solo and Chewbacca in it, and then you're fine. But aside from that, it's nearly impossible to hedge your bet on a film because it's so subjective. And I think the reason that Star Wars, and it's getting some backlash because they're saying it's just really a remake of New Hope. But I think that they purposely made it very retro and very nostalgic because they knew they couldn't lose with that. And as a corporation that Disney just bought Lucasfilm for a decent amount of money, I think in general, I think they made a very, very smart decision by doing what they did with it, because I think if they explored anything that was too far out of the realm of the narrative that people know, I think it would have been too hard of a leap. But people wanted the original movies, but that's another story for another day.
Well, and tying it back to Bond and going back to, Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson, I think that, I don't know if it's true, but you could say that they did kind of pull from the Bond playbook and say, look,
sure,
you get the right team of people to shepherd something and kind of keep it running. And, you can change the guard here and there, but really, if you have that core team that's really going to guide it, focused, I think that's the strength. And that, I think, is what Marvel has done so well. And I think now Star Wars is doing the same. They're finding the right teams to guide these franchises to actually make them grow and continue and succeed without stumbling and devolving.
Well, what's interesting is I agree. And what they did was, Casino Royale was just a colossal success and people loved it. And then they made Quantum of Solace, which I won't talk about because we're not talking about that film. But that did not get the same favorable critical, and particularly within the fans, the reviews, a lot of people I know don't like it. And because of that, they swung so far back to the sort of the main mythology of Bond in Skyfall, that to the point where they're almost winking at the audience. Like, hey, look, he's got a DB5 and, as a car, and he's going to do this, and he's going to say this, and he's going to have this kind of gun, and we're going to have Q, and we're going to have all these things. And, and I loved all of that, but that's where sort of, I almost, to me, was a unwritten or unspoken, yelling out, okay, we went really far off track with Quantum of Solace. We're bringing it back. I mean, because that to me, so putting the right team in, Casino Royale was the right team. And I think Quantum of Solace, there were a lot of terrific filmmakers and a lot of really good people, but it kind of got off track. And just the whole style of the film, the editing, the action was very, very different from what you would expect. In fact, even kind of delved into the world of the Bourne franchises, the Bourne Identity franchise, all very shaky camera and very, very staccato editing. And completely not what you saw in Casino Royale or the earlier Bond films. So it is about getting the right team who understands, yes, you want the filmmakers to definitely put their signature and their thumbprint on the film, but also you've got to stay within what people expect. Stupid cliche, but if you're going to go to a Rolling Stones concert, they better play Satisfaction. There's going to have to be something that you're like, I like this. And you can play the new stuff, but I'm going to see some of your old stuff too. So you got to have that in there.
Yeah, we're going to have a conversation about the martini, even if I don't care if it's shaken or stirred. That, to me, is a wink at the audience, but in a way that I found satisfying.
Right. It wasn't, Absolutely. It wasn't, exactly. And I thought that
wasn't
an
eye-rolling one.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Well, in the same respect, you look at David Arnold's score, which I think, the music has been, such a driving force behind the Bond franchise that for him to be able to do such a beautiful score with only a nod to Monty Norman's theme until the closing credits.
Of course.
That was unreal restraint musically. I mean, it was
absolutely
beautiful.
It was unreal restraint, and then to to throw that out there in the end, it was terrific because it's now like, and then of course he says the name's Bond, James Bond, and that was, now it's the moment where Bond has we've closed this chapter on his life, and now he's become the guy that we're now going to see in the next X number of films be James Bond that we sort of know, because this movie is all really, frankly, an origin story. So,
taking on the mantle.
Exactly. So having the theme at the end was terrific because, and it was funny because it points in the movie, I'm like, wow, they're not playing the theme. Okay, maybe they're just, doing a choice or whatever. And then when they start playing, I'm like, it was such a smart move without hitting the audience over the head. And as soon as that theme started coming up, I'm like, oh, this is fantastic.
Well, you realize you're in tears. You didn't even know it because you're suddenly a 10-year-old in the theater again.
Yeah, it was a great, great introduction to Bond, the low angle, and he's got like the assault rifle with the silencer, and he's in the suit with the vest. I mean, it's really old school, but yet,
really there's no Walther PPK in this thing at all. I mean, that big gun and that low angle. I mean, this is a new Bond, and one I was really connected to.
It was excellent.
Absolutely.
Andy, so we've already alluded to the fact that it performed pretty darn well in the theaters. How'd it do?
This film did pretty well for itself. It ended up costing about $102 million in 2006 dollars, which is about 118 in today's dollars. And then it had a P&A budget of about 48 million. So they spent a little bit of money advertising it. All told, they ended up spending about 150 million to make this thing and get it out into the world, which adjusted is about 174 million. Ended up making 167 million domestically, 431.6 million internationally.
Wow.
So when you adjust that, it ended up making almost $700 million, and that boils down.
That's phenomenal.
Oh, it's great, absolutely great. Yeah, it's a adjusted profit to cost of almost 4%. So they made a nice chunk of money. It's about $3.6 million adjusted profit per finished minute. So
fantastic.
Good job with this one.
That is a beautiful way to start the Daniel Craig era.
And I think it's I can't remember. I didn't look at the numbers. I should have, but I feel like I don't know about Quantum of Solace, but I feel like Skyfall and now Spectre have both kind of shot up above this one. Isn't that right?
I think Skyfall did better than Spectre, and I know it did better than Casino Royale. Was my understanding. I don't remember the numbers, but I seem to remember Skyfall being the largest grossing Bond film in the franchise. Although if you adjust the numbers on Goldfinger, I think that may have beaten it if you take those numbers, because they had a time. There was a point where Goldfinger was playing something like 24 hours a day when film. No, it was crazy because they didn't know it was going to be such a hit, and it did so darn well that there was a point where a couple theaters were playing it like 24 hours a day or something back in the day in the 60s. So
wow.
So it did really well. But yeah,
that's the big question for me all of a sudden now that we're talking about numbers. I wonder who is adjusted is the most profitable Bond.
Yeah, I'd have to go through and look at them all.
I'd have to say I think it was Goldfinger, to be honest. That or Thunderball. It was one of those two because Goldfinger did such an insane amount of business. Because I remember watching, I don't remember where I saw this, it was some show and they were talking about it. But I think Goldfinger was the one, or maybe it was Thunderball because it was the follow up and people were excited. Because that's usually sometimes how it happens. But
how old a guy are you?
I'm 33. No, I'm just kidding. I'm in my mid 40s.
Okay, so what was do you remember your first Bond? Like, what Bond was your first Bond?
Thunderball. Even though I didn't see it in the theater, but my parents were huge Bond fans, and I saw it on television. And then they would it was it was this Sunday night movie because I didn't have a VCR when I was a kid in the 70s. But Thunderball, we had the board game, which is really crazy. I never played it.
Cool.
No, there was an actual Thunderball. Never played it, but like look at the pictures. I was kind of an intellectually challenged youth. I never no cards, no math, none of that crap. But
the Thunderball board game, though, that's on the mantle.
The Thunderball board game. You look now at these ridiculous first-person shooters that people play. What do you got? I got the board game for Thunderball. That's what do you do? I get to be a Blofeld in a boat. But it's a little like action figure on a board. But no, Thunderball was the first Bond film I had seen, and then of course obviously, and then the first Bond film I saw in the theater, I would almost say, I don't think it was Moonraker. It may have been Moonraker. When I was growing up, I grew up in Miami, Florida, and we didn't. I was kind of out in the sticks at the time, in a small area called Kendall, which was kind of literally in the middle of the Everglades or the edge of the Everglades. And we used to go to drive-in movies. My parents would always take me to drive-in movies. So I didn't see a lot of movies as a young kid in the theater. All the films I saw as a really young kid from the ages of 0, well, really 4 was the first film I'd ever seen, to 8 were in drive-ins. And the first film my parents ever took me to, and this really totally crafts and frames exactly my mentality, was Blazing Saddles. My parents thought this was a good film for a 4-year-old. And apparently it was, because I remember going, and I remember specific scenes, seeing it sitting in a car in a drive-in.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So funny.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. I think mine was, Andy, do you remember yours?
Mine was You Only Live Twice on VHS over at a friend's house. Or it was a parents' night, and all the parents were watching it, and the kids got to watch that one. So it was very exciting, and I loved it.
That one's awesome because Roald Dahl wrote the script.
Really?
Right,
it is awesome.
Is that true?
Yes.
That is true.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Mine was definitely VHS. It was Spy Who Loved Me, which I didn't see in the theater. That's when I fell in love with the franchise and had to go back. Dad was also a big fan, and so I was probably too young to see them all at the time, but we did anyway. What are you going to do?
I think my first theater, I don't think I saw one in the theater until A View to a Kill. So it was quite a while before I actually went to the theater to see one.
Oh yeah, no, it was For Your Eyes Only, or Moonraker. I think was the first First one I saw, no, I didn't. I wouldn't. I would have been too young for that. It would have had to have been later than that.
For Your Eyes
Probably
Only.
Octopussy.
Maybe, yeah, that or then For Your Eyes Only, I think was after the next one after Octopussy, if I'm not mistaken.
The other way around. For Your Eyes Only, and then Octopussy, then View to a Kill.
Right. Yeah.
Anyhow, okay, so I think at this point, it's time for us to rank it.
Yes, it is.
Are you familiar, Matt, with Flickchart?
I'm not.
All right, here are the rules. Andy and I have talked about a lot of films on this particular show over the last 4 years, and every week we go to the website flickchart.com, and what Flickchart does is it is a brutal, the brutal decider. Where it just gives you your current movie that you're talking about now
Isn't
today.
the brutal decider George W. Bush? No,
It is run by a George W. Bush AI construct that allows us to just put two movies side by side. The movie we're talking about tonight and one of the movies that we've talked about in the past. It does not discriminate with genre or period or anything.
Interesting.
And all you do is choose. And I think it will probably run through, I don't know, what does it usually do, Andy? About eight or so? And
It's something like that,
It'll land Casino Royale somewhere on our Flickchart list of top films. Now, there are no rules. You'll hear a pairing. It may be, let's just say, Casino Royale versus The Sound of Music, and you have to decide which one's better for you right now. So those are the rules. If we hit a movie that you have not seen, I find that hard to imagine. But if we hit a movie you have not seen, don't worry about it. Andy and I will do that ranking. And luckily there are three of us, so we actually have a tiebreaker.
So I'm supposed to. I will tell you which one I like better.
That is the deal.
Which one would you pick?
We will come to a decision about where Casino
Space
Royale
Smash
sits.
for movies.
It is. It's like Tinder for movies. Swipe
that's
right.
Delightful. That's great.
That's right. All right, Andy, shall we begin?
Let's do it. So first up, Casino Royale or Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Oh, that's impossible. That's like saying, do you like the taste of an apple or getting hit on the head with a bat? Or that's actually completely the worst analogy. No, that makes no sense. No, because I love both films.
Yes.
I think Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is an absolutely terrific film. I can't rank that. I can't say which one's better because they both are so different. You know, I
they
think
both satisfy totally different
different
needs.
And I'm a huge Coen Brothers fan and have had the good fortune to work on a couple of their pictures. So, I honestly couldn't tell you which one's better because it's like, what's a better action picture? Okay, well, maybe Casino Royale. Which one is better regarding maybe absurd character development in musical? Well, I have to say, Oh Brother, I don't know. I can't.
It's hard. I hear you. I absolutely hear your pain. We sometimes call these the Flickchart hate crimes by pairing two movies that are both so good. And sometimes it just comes down to this: which one is easier to just put on and watch? And for me, at this point, I'm going to have to go with Casino Royale.
And I am too.
You know,
it makes it easier for you because now it doesn't matter which one you pick. But it's just one of those things where it's like, what is the? Yeah, I mean, I sometimes look at it. Which one would I put on first? Which one would I? Which one makes me laugh more? I mean, it's always kind of a little arbitrary. I think that's what makes it fun. It's like trying to put these lists together. But yeah.
I'm gonna have to go with. I think I have to go with Zardoz. I think we're gonna pick the. I'll pick the most absurd.
You can't start cheating now.
I'm gonna throw in movies that don't even make sense. Honestly, that's it. I'm at a draw because if it's a matter of what's the easiest to put on and watch, okay, I would say probably Casino Royale for no other reason that. It's a pretty straight up story, and it's something. This is gonna sound ridiculous, but it's something you kind of zone out watching because you know the action, you know the beats. But I really like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? So now, did you plug this into this flick chart?
And now it moves us to the next ranking on our list. So now we just go to the next film.
Well, what did it say?
Well, Casino Royale beat Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? So now it moves up on our list. I mean,
got it.
Yeah, and so it'll just keep moving up until we, until something beats it, and then it'll
fall down a little bit.
Yeah, fall down a little bit. Right.
All right. So what's the next rank?
The next one is Casino Royale or The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Casino Royale.
Yeah, Casino Royale.
I can't. I like certain parts of that film, but it's not something that I would watch a couple times.
Yeah,
I really like it when I watch it, and then when I'm away from it, I'm like, I find it hard to think about putting it on.
Yeah, every time I finish it, I'm wearing my diapers, and I just don't like it. It's just awful. Or maybe that's when I started. I don't know.
All right. All right. Casino Royale or National Lampoon's Vacation?
Casino Royale in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I'd have to say Casino Royale only because it's just a different film. I mean, Vacation is fun, but yeah, it's just a different. Because the Vacation's like light fare, I guess you could say. It's fun, but I like Casino Royale.
Yeah, I'll do Casino Royale too, and I love Vacation, but yeah, it's just there's something different about it. Well, this is a tough one for me. Casino Royale or Brazil? Brazil's my favorite film, so.
Again, that falls for me in the rank of Oh Brother Arthur. They're just too different to compare because they're. I would have to throw the towel in on that because it's kind of a draw because they're just two different films. But if it had to go back, putting it in and just watching and kind of zoning out, I don't know, maybe Casino Royale. But I haven't seen Brazil in a long time, so right now would be let's see Brazil because I don't know what did the diabolical machine say?
Well, we haven't done it yet because we have to vote.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
Andy, are you you're doing Brazil?
I'm doing Brazil.
I'm gonna have to do Brazil too.
They made a sequel? I'm sorry. Brazil as well. I got you.
Yes.
Yeah, there's some studio executive who's listening going, wait a minute, let me write that down.
Wait, Brazil sequel can do that?
Let's get Terry Gilliam on the line. He'll jump at the chance. All right, Casino Royale or My Favorite Year? Oh, our last Speakeasy.
Oh, that was last month. I'm going to go Casino Royale. I don't really have a hard time with this one. No. I adored My Favorite Year. I think it's a terrific film.
I did too, but I'll go Casino Royale as well.
Yeah, I got to be Casino Royale as well. Yeah, I'd have to say those three.
Yeah. Okay, Casino Royale or Delicatessen?
Oh.
I'd say Casino Royale. I worked with Jean-Pierre Jeunet on Alien Resurrection, and I like his films. And City of Lost Children are great, but Casino Royale. It's just they're entirely different pictures, and it's kind of hard to compare. But that's what I'd have to say.
I would say Casino Royale. I love Delicatessen, but I'm going to go with Bond.
I would too. I'm going to do Casino Royale, even though I'm chuckling inside at the bed scene right now.
Oh, sure.
Oh my goodness, that's a good film. All right, Casino
Royale or Snowpiercer?
I've only seen, sadly, the trailer to Snowpiercer, and I know a lot of people. Yeah, I know. Oh. Well, you said a film I didn't see, so I didn't. I'll lie. My favorite part is when they're in the train and it's snowing. That's my favorite part. I didn't see the movie, so.
All right, so it's down to us, Andy. I'm Casino.
Yeah, I think I am too. As much as I love Snowpiercer. Yeah. All right.
So does the machine is the machine agreeing with all these choices or no?
No, the machine is a diabolical, emotionless, automaton. It just tells us. It gives us our insights that we didn't even know we had.
Got it. Well, that's good. It's like politicians.
Exactly.
Right now.
It's like a ranking chart. So we pick
single
one,
elimination.
It jumps it up 50%.
Gotcha.
It puts it up against 150% from there, and it kind of keeps doing that up and down until it kind of finds a place where it thinks that it's going to land. And that's it. We're at number 15 on our list, right between Brazil and Snowpiercer. So I think that's a good spot for it.
Well, I do too, and I'm going to tell you, I watching this movie again, it reminded me of all the hue and cry about Daniel Craig and about Spectre and about how we feel about the latest Bond. This film reminded me why Daniel Craig is my favorite Bond. And this, I think, is my favorite Bond film.
Wow!
It really, it shines in terms of pacing and character, and it just hits every beat for me. And that doesn't even begin to talk about the incredible stunt work and
right.
It is the perfect Bond for me, and that's it. I'm on the record.
Well, I'd have to say. It's neck and neck between this, and only because this was what gave the Bond every bit of its mythology and all the tropes. Goldfinger is neck and neck for me, the two best. Because if you haven't watched Goldfinger in a long time, and I almost picked that film for this show, but I went with Casino Royale just because of the fact that Spectre had just come out, and Bond is a little bit fresher in everyone's mind, or at least Daniel Craig. But Goldfinger is actually a really well-structured film. There are scenes, obviously, there's like rear projection and things that take you out of it because it may be some dated kind of effects or looks or what have you. But it sets up everything, even the stuff that's in Casino Royale is set up in the style and how the character is a bit in Goldfinger. So to me, I would say it's neck and neck. Those are my two favorites out of the franchise.
All right, I take that as a good recommendation. I need to go back and watch Goldfinger again. It's been a long time.
Yeah, Goldfinger has always been my favorite until this, and now, just like you, it's always been neck and neck between these two. There are some dated elements in that sometimes I'm like, I wish that didn't happen in Goldfinger, but for the most part, it is such a solid film, and I really enjoy that. So these two have always been my two faves.
Well, what's funny about Goldfinger, and this is where, and like I said, we're not going on the Spectre, pros and cons, but Spectre has a torture scene, and in Goldfinger, it's the bit where he says, you expect me to talk Goldfinger? He's like, no, I expect you to die.
You to die.
Yeah, and it's great because here you are setting up the guy who's going to monologue, like this is the whole thing. And no, he doesn't even want to do that. He's like, no, I'm going to kill you. And then it's not until Bond threatens him with, well, I know such and such. And then he's like, he realizes that he can't kill Bond at that point.
Yeah.
He doesn't keep him alive because it's like, well, I want you to hear my master plan so you could defeat me. I mean, it's like, it's not that. Although, funny enough, in Goldfinger has probably one of the funniest moments, in even though it's terrific and it all works with like the Ken Adam, production design and everything else, is he takes everybody into this he takes all the gangsters into this giant room and shows them the giant model of how he's going to get Fort Knox, goes through his whole plan, and then just kills them all. It's like, so you built this model that comes up out of the ground, and you have to go through this whole master plan of how you're going to steal all the gold in Fort Knox. And then I'm going to kill you. Like, he went through this whole elaborate scheme, and it's not that it's a Bond film, but it's one of the funniest things in the first Austin Powers, or one of the Austin Powers, when he's explaining to Dr. Evil, what's his number one or number two? It's I can't remember the actor. Terrific, Robert Wagner. And he's like, I've diversified all our funds, and we have a company that builds miniature models of miniature models, and because that's the absolute parody of Goldfinger at that moment. But Goldfinger is a really good film because it does set up every single Bond film after Goldfinger. It has those tropes and has all those gags, and it worked enough that almost even Casino Royale has a few of nods to that, whether it's intentional or unintentional, but I think it works pretty well.
All right, where does that leave us on a star rating out of 5 stars? Matt?
Casino Royale? 5. I'd say 5 because it's a movie, I had thrown out that I wanted to talk about the film, and I hadn't seen it in a month or so, because actually I watch it every few months, and I watched it before the show, and I was like, man, this is a really good film. It's just, and I'll tell you something. I'll tell you how good it is and how undated it is. I had seen Spectre. I said, yeah, I saw it a month ago. Well, I saw Spectre, and I had to watch Casino Royale again after seeing Spectre, and you forget that Casino Royale was like 10 years ago. It's a 10-year-old film. And because Daniel Craig, the reason I realized it was made in 2006, because there's a point where he looks at this time date on a security camera, and it says July 6, 2006. And I'm like, holy, my God, that's 10 years ago. But what gets you is you look at Daniel Craig, and look, he's a handsome fellow, and he doesn't look old, but he looks so much younger in Casino Royale, because I had just seen Spectre.
Yeah, he really does.
But anyway, I'd say 5. It's 5.
It's a 5-star for me too, Andy.
And 5-star for me too.
There we go. Well done, Casino.
Absolutely. Well, it has been a lot of fun having you on the show, Matt, talking about Casino Royale. Where should people find you if they want to check out your stuff that you guys are up to?
Usually we do. I mean, we're doing a lot of crazy things. We have a website. It's newdealstudios.com. which kind of covers some of our visual effects work. We're doing a lot of things right now in virtual reality. We're shooting in 360 degrees with a number of companies right now. I'm currently working with Nokia. Nokia has a really kind of neat camera called the Ozo camera. I just shot a piece called Mutiny, which is a sort of little pirate adventure. There is a music video I did for a terrific young indie rock band out of California called Galvanized Souls. So if you look at Galvanized Souls, it's either galvanizedSouls.com or look up Galvanized Souls on YouTube 360, and the song is called New Generation. That was a 360 video that I directed and written, shot in 360 VR. So we're doing a lot of those things, and I'm pitching to direct a couple live action pictures right now. So hopefully those things in 2016 go forth. But I have to say I'm very fortunate. I've had very, very great fortune and luck with a lot of the clients we've worked with over the years. And, the truth of the matter is the film business is very challenging. So working with great directors and great studios and good projects is really kind of all you can ask for in this business.
It is just looking at the credits of New Deal and the credits on your IMDb page. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous just how many great films you and your team have touched. So, it is our great pleasure and honor to have you on this show and share a little bit of your insights and just share your love for a great movie. And so, thank you so much for doing everything you do. We sure appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it, and thank you guys for the invitation. And like I said, it was a lot of fun, and it was fun to talk about the movie. It's fun to talk about a movie that not only that I liked, I didn't work on. So that way,
there you go.
But anyway, thank you. I really appreciate being on the show, and this is great.
Thank you so much. And for everyone out there, we hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Instagram, Pinterest, Letterboxd, and of course, Flickchart. And don't forget to head on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and comment. It really does help more people find us. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, we'll be kicking back, drinking our martinis. It doesn't matter if they're shaken or stirred. It's hard to believe that we've been having in-depth weekly conversations about movies since 2011.
So many great conversations over the years about so many great movies. All that said, producing this show week after week requires a ton of work behind the scenes.
Becoming a Next Reel member gives you access to all sorts of additional and exclusive content. Plus, you're helping us keep the lights on. Just head to thenextreel.com/membership, where you can learn more about becoming a member, which costs a measly $5 a month, practically the same as one fancy coffee drink. And you get so much more.
Every month, we record a bonus episode exclusively for members. Those episodes cover movies from whatever series we're covering at the moment, or add to previous series.
Some movies we've covered that only members get to hear us discuss include The Blues Brothers,
The Russia House,
Naked Lunch,
Independence Day,
The Hot Rock,
and Relic, the better one. Plus, members get to vote on what we're going to discuss for those episodes.
We also record additional pre- and post-show content in regular episodes that only members get to hear.
Like conversations about similarly themed movies.
And answering listener questions from our live member chat.
Speaking of our live member chat, we record almost all of our episodes in Discord, where members can chat right along with us live.
Members get access to other members-only channels in our Discord community as well. On top of all that, members get all episodes a full week earlier than everyone else in a private Next Reel feed just for them that includes all the shows in the Next Reel family. The Next Reel, the Film Board,
movies we like, Sitting in the Dark, and more new projects on the way.
To top it all off, members don't have to listen to ads. We've already eliminated those annoying, dynamically inserted ads that, let's face it, we all hated.
We are listening to you.
We love podcasting for a living, and those ads help to pay the bills. Now, we're counting on you, dear listener.
We promise. We aren't going back to those terrible, dynamically inserted ads that don't relate to us at all. All we ask is that you consider supporting the Next Reel family of podcasts with a membership.
Again, it's $5 per month or $55 per year. Just head to thenextreel.com/membership.
thenextreel.com/membership. Get your access to early, ad-free episodes with bonus content, member bonus episodes, and access to member channels and live streams in Discord by signing up today.